I thought I would make a video detailing where Nekroz is at in our current meta now that the April 1st ban list has been released. I wanted to go over some of the, like all of the relevant archetypes and just show how Nekroz stacks up against some of these different decks. So I'm splitting this presentation into 5 categories. First, the decks that you will always win against playing Nekroz. The next category is decks you'll almost always win against. You still have a really good matchup against them, but not as good as the first category. Then there's 50-50, decks that are a coin toss. You can't really tell either way. The decks you will almost always lose against. And then lastly, we'll wrap it up with the decks that you will hard lose against. Like, it's almost impossible to win against some of these decks we'll discuss at the end. So, first category, the decks you'll win against. That's going to be Dragon Link, Shaddoll Invoked, Heroes, Salamangreat, Cyber Dragon, Sky Striker, Infernoid, and Burning Abyss. And we're going to get into, I'm just going to list them off really quickly there, but we're going to get into them all one by one. So with Dragon Link, the pros for this matchup is that Dragon Link cannot consistently generate strong boards. They're just not as consistent as a deck like Spiral, for example, was in the past format. They cannot recur resources. Their cards simply do not have any graveyard or hand effects. So once you break their board, which, if you're playing Nekroz, you should be playing a going second variant. So once you break their board, there's really not much they can do to resist you at that point. The deck also loses hard to Unicorn. Obviously, it's Dragon Link. They want to summon out Link monsters to get their effects off, but if you can stop that and sit on Unicorn for a little while, they really can't. They really have no way to get around that. I can't think of a single card in the deck that would be able to destroy Unicorn, unless they attack over it, but, use Valkyris. The deck loses hard to Valkyris as well. The cons for this matchup, they can create too many negates to out. Again, that's very rare. Aside from that very, very rare occurrence, you should always be winning this matchup. Shaddoll Invoked. The pros for this matchup, Nekroz was literally made to beat Shaddolls. I don't know if you guys can remember all the way back to 2015, but Nekroz is the deck that, aside from the ban list obviously did some major damage to Shaddolls, but Nekroz was really the nail in the coffin for this archetype. It's what pushed it to the fringes when Nekroz was a tier 0 deck. Nekroz also plays around Winda. We don't really need to special summon more than once per turn. It can create some problems now that we're running the incantations, but other than that, you can play around Winda pretty effectively. It also helps that virtually every ritual monster in your deck has 100 or more higher attack points than Winda. Like Unicorn, Bryanak, they both have 2,300. Colossalus can make her attack 0. Trish and Val, self-explanatory. Also with Shaddolls, Trishula is always an option. Shaddolls have a very hard time playing around Trishula. They're always going to have a card in their hand, because when the Shaddolls die, they get back a fusion, so they're always going to have something in their hand. Cons for this matchup, Invoked Makaba is hard to beat sometimes, especially if they negate your ritual spells, but other than that, you should really always win this matchup. No excuse. Heroes. Pros. They cannot negate anything. This matchup is so easy for Nekroz, I can't even begin to describe it. They lose to Valkyris, Unicorn, and Trishula, virtually everything in your deck. They lose to Evenly Matched, they lose to Super Polymerization, and if you break their board, they have 0 follow-up. Cons, they can play some of the smart hero players, of which there are very few. They can play Solemn Judgment to stop your Evenly Matched. Even then, I think you should still be winning. Also, Destiny Hero Plasma can suck. But if we're going second and they play Plasma first, they're not going to be able to protect it. You just Unicorn over that shit. Salamangreat. The pros, Trishula hurts this deck more than with any other deck because you can banish their one-ofs, like Gazelle. I've also noticed Salamangreat players sometimes I don't want to say often, but there's a lot of times where Salamangreat has just ended with one Gazelle in hand, and, they've totally committed to the board. So if you can bait out their negates and then trish them, you're going to be hitting that one Gazelle, and you're going to be in a great spot. They lose to Unicorn. The only way they can really get around Unicorn is with Salamangreat Roar, I'm pretty sure it's called, the one that destroys cards on the field equal to the link arrows on their monster. But yeah, Salamangrate's been hurt by the ban list in such a way that makes Unicorn even more viable. And the cons, like I said earlier, Roar and Rage especially hurt. If they can keep setting those up every turn, you may lose. But other than that, you should be winning the Salamangrate matchup. Cyber Dragon. Pros, Infinity loses to Unicorn. It doesn't only stop Infinity's negation effect, but Unicorn also stops the attack gain. So Infinity just becomes a 2100 vanilla monster that you can attack over. They also have no follow-up play, really, after Trishula because Cyber Dragons, they're committing so much to the board. I don't think I've ever lost a game to Cyber Dragons with Nekroz before. Cons for this matchup, you can get randomly OTK'd because it's Cyber Dragons and Infinity. If you can't find the right cards, which is rare, Nekroz, it's the most consistent deck in the game. Infinity can be very bad for you if you open up garbage. Sky Striker. Pros, no more engage. They cannot OTK. Trishula can banish all of their one-ofs, and obviously against Sky Striker, Unicorn wins games. You can stop Widow Anchor by discarding Trishula using its effect. Cons, I see a lot of Sky Striker decks playing Mystic Mine, and that can be a problem for us. That could even, make us have to go to Game 2. We'll have to win Game 2 and 3 against Sky Striker because of Mystic Mine. Infernoid, this is a rare deck to see, but I thought I'd cover it because, I've seen it come up a couple times in competitive play. Pros against Infernoid, this deck really doesn't have a clear win condition aside from OTKing you. And Trishula hurts. Trishula hurts this deck. Cons is if they drop Christie on you, obviously we don't have any outs for that, and we have to go to Game 2. And Unicorn is not as effective in this matchup because they're not really relying on the extra deck. Burning Abyss. The pros, like Shadal's, Burning Abyss was built to lose to Nekroz. Just looking at their effects, Nekroz effects and Burning Abyss effects, you can tell how Nekroz kind of power creeped that entire archetype. Like Burning Abyss, you can only use one of their effects per turn, but with Nekroz, each of the cards have 2 effects, and you can use them both, but only once per turn. So it's kind of a natural power creep there. And yeah, it just loses to Unicorn, Valk, Trish, Brio, Colossalus. Every card in the deck is good against Burning Abyss. Cons, though, are Vanity's Fiend. Hopefully they don't summon Vanity's Fiend on us, right, guys? That's going to do it for the decks you should always win against. Now we're going to move on to the decks that you will almost always win against. That being Spiral, Altergeist. Spiral is should have a little asterisk next to it. I was working on this PowerPoint for a while. So Spiral, Altergeist, Mystic Mine, Thunder Dragon, Grenmaju. Spiral, pros for the matchup, Unicorn wins games. Trishula is generally always an option. Dweller kills the deck, and we don't care about Spiral Sleeper either. Spiral is also horribly inconsistent, not as consistent as Nekroz anyways, and Master Plan was recently banned. I still think with drones going to 3 that this deck could still be really good. It remains to be seen. Obviously, Master Plan hurts a lot, but hey, they can still play Magician's Souls. They can make use of that. They just have to play more bricks. But other than that, I still think Spiral can make their god board, quote unquote. But it can be played around. So more often than not, you're going to win this matchup. Altergeist, people would be surprised how well Nekroz can play through negates. I was playing against an Altergeist player at locals, and I was able to play through like double Solemn Judgment, triple Solemn Strike. I'm not even joking. It was a crazy matchup, but the deck can do it. So yeah, pros against Altergeist, you can banish Multi-Faker pretty easily with Trishula. And I play Denko Sekka in the side deck. Altergeist obviously loses to that. You can play through multiple negates, and yeah, they don't really play any turn-ending negates against you. They don't play Droll, Mistake, so on. Altergeist isn't really aren't really playing those cards. Cons, you can lose to Hexia, the card where, you tribute the Altergeist, negate any card. And some, Altergeist can pretty easily break out multiple Hexias if you're a good player. Another con is that you can just be floodgated to death. And hey, there's no shame in that. Just go on to game 2 and side your Denkos, right? Mystic Mine, pretty simple matchup. The pros, we almost always win game 2 and 3. And the conversely, though, we will almost always lose game 1 because I only play 2 main decked Twin Twisters, and if they got a Scald's Oracle you, gonna be pretty hard to take game 1. But the side deck should be loaded up with all kinds of cards to beat mine, so you should win game 2 and 3. Thunder Dragon. Pros, Colossus is dead. This matchup used to be impossible. This match used to be, it went from 0%, totally unwinnable, to you're going to almost always beat this deck. Yeah. Trishula can go off every turn, and also almost no one plays Thunder Dragon anymore. Cons for this matchup, though, you can get randomly OTK'd more consistently, and also Trishula's Banish effect can sometimes plus your opponent. That's where you can Trishula fails to do its job, and you can see your opponent plussing and killing you next turn. Gren Maju, this might seem kind of weird to not put it in the category where you should almost always win, but I'll explain that in a second. Valkyrus blocks Gren from killing you. The deck really doesn't have an out to Valkyrus. Trishula obviously murders this deck. Cons, though, Unicorn is not really effective in this matchup. You can also get, of course, OTK'd by Gren. Also, something I forgot to mention, the reason why this deck is in this category is because this deck can consistently pump out, very high attack point danger monsters every turn, like Bigfoot, which has 3,000 attack. And if you've played Nekroz for more than 2 seconds, you would know that this deck has a hard time getting over big monsters. So if you can't reliably trish them every turn, it can be very hard to win this matchup. So 50-50, we just have 2 decks, Lunalight with a question mark and Orchist. So Lunalight loses to Super Polymerization and Evenly Matched. It also loses to Unicorn or any kind of effect negation, and Trishula is basically always in play. The cons for this matchup, break my board. Lunalight is a big break my board deck. If you can't break it, you just lose. I don't know why this is in cons. It should be in pros, but Tiger has just been banned. I think that's really going to hurt the deck a lot more than Master Plan getting banned. For Spiral will hurt Spiral, but Tiger getting banned I think is going to hurt a lot. But the deck still could be good. I'm not going to, I've said that decks are dead before, and I've been wrong, so I'm gonna reserve judgment for that. But Tiger's banned, that's gotta hurt. Orchist, it's perhaps the most even matchup you're ever gonna come across with this deck. So Trishula can make recycling their resources almost impossible, and Unicorn can shut down early plays. The average attack value as well, of your Nekroz monsters are higher than the Orchist monsters, like Dingirsu, he's only got 2,600. Orchist can't really OTK you, and also there is very little back row that Orchist sets up for you to play through. The cons for this matchup, though, they can play around Unicorn by reviving Dingirsu from the grave and then sending your Unicorn away from there. Smart players get around Trishula. Obviously, Orchist doesn't really have to have cards in their hand. They can set their whole hand just fine, dump all their monsters in the graveyard, and pass. If they're smart and play around Trishula, it can be very hard to win that game. Orchist can also grind much longer than Nekroz, and Nekroz is already a very grindy deck, so you can imagine what that must be like. Infinite Impermanence is main decked by a lot of Orcus players, and Orchestrated Babel is really good. You know, it's just Pot of Greed. They get they get 2 turns for every 1 turn you get. It's really bad. It really hurts to have to play through Babel. This list is the decks you will almost always lose against. So that's going to be Pendulum, True Draco, and Dinosaur. So Pendulum, the pros for that matchup, they almost always lose to going second cards. Trishula can still be effective, and there's no follow-up for a Pendulum player after you break their turn 1 board. And I play Spear Mode in the side deck, so that is virtually always live against Pendulum players. You know, you lose game 1, you go to game 2, you side Spear Mode, make them go first, break their board with Spear Mode next turn if you draw it. Hopefully you do. Cons, Pendulums can create too many negates, 2 out pretty consistently. They can banish cards on your field. I forget the name, but one of their magician cards. He can banish your Trishula, and if you don't have him, I mean, you're out of luck. They can negate your ritual spells with the Master Endymion card. They have very high attack monsters. They are not reliant on the extra deck, and they can recur resources pretty effectively. So it's a very hard matchup to win. You will rarely beat Pendulum Magicians when you go up against them. True Draco, this is an interesting one. They're not very consistent, and they can be board broken if they don't have Solemn Judgment. Also, True Draco, you know, there's one guy at Locals who plays it, and he's very good, but more often than not, True Draco is played by, you know, kind of bad players. I've noticed, no offense to any good True Draco players, but, you know, it's the same with Nekroz. There are way more bad Nekroz players out there than there are good Nekroz players. You know, it's the same with True Draco. Cons, Trishula, not often live because of Card of Demise, and even though that's at 1, they can always just set their whole hand. Super Polymerization is totally ineffective against this deck. True Draco Apocalypse, that cuts your attack in half. You know, there's almost nothing you can do once your opponent has Apocalypse on board. Every single True Draco monster has a higher attack than almost all of your ritual monsters. Like, they all have 2,400. I think, what's the one? One of them has 23, but, you know, all the big one, all the real ones that they play that they're going to bring out first have 24. So it's very hard to attack over them. They can floodgate you to death very easily, and also Unicorn is not effective. Very hard matchup, even with Diagram and Card of Demise at 1. Dinosaur. So the only pro for this matchup is the deck loses to going second cards. If you evenly match them and follow them up with a Trishula play, it blows out the entire deck. Like, you're going to 100% win the game. Like, you should be winning. But there are way too many cons in this matchup. Some of the best players in the world play this deck. You know, they can just outskill you. They can beat you on their skill alone because they're very good at the game. They can play around Trishula very effectively. Their monsters are generally too strong to attack over. They can make Dolka, which, you know, can kill you. Like, if you're going second and they have Dolka turn 1, that just murders you. They can OTK very fast. Lithosagam is unbanned, and Unicorn is less effective than normal. You can stop Dolka if you open Unicorn, right? If you're trying to search it with Brynat, good luck. They're going to Dolka you. But Unicorn is less effective than it is for most matchups. Decks you will lose against, that's going to be Border Stun, Anti-Meta Rape, Generator, and Subterror. So Anti-Meta Rape, the only pro against this matchup is they can brick, but you're going to basically, it's almost impossible to win against Inspector Border because there's virtually no outs to Border. There's no outs for Fossil Dyna. There's no outs for Vanity's Fiend, and yeah, it's just, if your opponent is playing literally no fun allowed, you will probably lose because they can just keep dropping these BS cards every turn. Luckily, not a lot of people play this deck because it's just boring and stupid and gets blown out by like some of the real meta decks out there, but for our rogue, kind of weird deck, that being Nekroz, it can be very hard I mean, it's impossible to win. Generator, the only pro, evenly matched, blows this deck out completely, because if they have tokens on board, they have to banish every card on their field except for their tokens. But the cons, this boss monster that I have right here, the Boss of Delusion, it can banish a card on your field every turn. So the deck grinds super hard. It's going to banish all of your one-ofs, and the deck is just consistent enough to kill you. I always pray that I never have to go up against this deck, because it's a really good deck against us. Not so good, like, it's not tier 1 or anything, but it's just very good against Nekroz because it banishes Unicorn, Trishula, or ritual spells, whatever it wants. It's crazy. Subterror, this is another deck that you're almost never going to win against. Yeah, if you can stop them early, you win, and you can stop them early by the fact that they are slightly inconsistent. They can't always find Hidden City because it's not a Subterror card. They can't search it with Guru. The cons, though, they can very quickly build up too much advantage to overcome with Guru, and that kind of makes your Trishula useless. They have access to the most powerful trap card in the game, Subterror Final Battle, and they can negate your cards with Fiendus and stun you to death. This matchup is almost impossible. I've won maybe 5%, 5 to 10% of all the matchups I've had against this deck, and yeah, it's just almost impossible to overcome. Unicorn's also totally useless against this deck. Almost all of your Nekroz cards don't work against this deck, so yeah, almost impossible to win. That's going to be the end of this presentation. I hope you found it useful. I hope it wasn't too long, and I hope that gives some more insight into where Nekroz stands in the new meta this April. All right, thanks for watching, everybody.